Welcome to the Stephen McCain podcast, where every week I bring you people doing world-class things in the field of human optimization and performance. This week's guest is Dr. Patrick Porter. He is the inventor of the revolutionary meditation device called BrainTap. And if you haven't heard of this device, it is profound. I have been using it for the last few months, and it has just changes the way you feel. Literally, by the time you take it off after 15 minutes, you just feel more grounded, feel more in a state of mind for success. And I think in this day and age when we are all really high strung because of a lot of world events, having a device like this can really help you stay on track and keep your mind razor focused on the goals that you want to achieve in life rather than ping-ponging around from one situation to the next. I love this device. I had to get Dr. Patrick Porter on the podcast. He is a wizard with all things related to the brain, and we're going to get into it. You're going to learn some great things and hopefully really take a good look at this device to see if it might be a fit for you to fill that gap where maybe you have a hard time being consistent with your meditation, because I've tried meditation for the last 20-something years, tried all sorts of different meditations, and they work, but I've had a hard time being consistent. This device seems to bridge that gap for me. I love it, and let's see if you like it too. Let's do this. Dr. Porter, thank you so much for coming on to the Stephen McCain podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here, Stephen. Thank you.
Yeah, I love your product. The BrainTap has been something that I bought about a month, 6 weeks ago. I have been using, and I think it's a game changer. And can you just tell us what is BrainTap and what is it doing? I know that's a kind of a big question, but
I kind of tell people it's kind of like if you had a revolutionary piece of physical equipment for your muscles. This is for your neurology, to really get your neuroplasticity going. That's why we call it brain fitness, because most people don't realize that our brain needs to be fit just like our body does. So, and it's always happening anyway. You know, when we go out into nature, we're getting this kind of brain fitness going on. So what we're doing here is we're going to use light, sound, and vibration in combination to really, in a positive way, kind of like eustress. It's stressing the brain, but it's fun. It's like playing a game, or working out. You know, working out isn't exactly fun. I still remember my uncles in the 70s when I went to their farms in Iowa and said, okay, I'm going to be back. I'm going for a 3-mile run. They're like, what? Why don't you come out on the fields and we'll show you how to work out? You know, they didn't understand what we were doing back then, you know, because nobody worked out, right? It was just starting to be the craze. Arnold didn't, do his movies or unless you watched Jack LaLanne, you didn't know those things were happening. And I think now we're in the age where people are understanding that this lifestyle that we've chose since the 70s and maybe even as early as the 60s is really crushing our brain. And it's really what you would call neuroplasticity. So we have a lot of research that shows that if you can get more energy into the brain, obviously your brain works better. And that's so we have a lot of things going on. Our brain absorbs light energy, sound energy, and meditation has always been known to do that. But the problem is most people just fall asleep. They don't get the benefits of meditation because they don't know how to do it. So my dad, being a meditation teacher, we always look for ways to accelerate people's learning of how to get, it's really to get into that state, not to meditate, but how do you get the same physiological benefits without having to take 30 years to learn how to meditate?
Yeah. And I've tried a lot of meditation and I've struggled to be consistent with it. I've done art of living retreats. I've done 5 days silent retreats that have a kriya at the end. I've learned from gurus how to meditate and a lot of breathing stuff, a lot of yoga. It helped me in my sport because as a gymnast, you have to have a rock solid emotional state when you compete. But it's been so hard to be consistent. And with your product, the two things I notice is it's very easy for me to be consistent because I just, for some reason, have connected with it. Like I look forward to it. And the second thing is I feel markedly different afterwards. I feel so much more centered and a lack of anxiety after using your product. And I call it the Peloton of meditation.
So instead of I like that. Yeah, I like
that. Instead of a bike and a trainer, we have a headset. And like for everyone watching, this is it. You put this on your ears and this goes in front of your eyes. And you have, correct me if I'm wrong, about 1,800 different audio lessons that go the full range of gamut for, maybe you could kind of explain some of that,
Yeah,
what
one
you.
of the reasons you feel good is we're down regulating the sympathetic system. And it's the kind of world we live in right now, unfortunately, has everybody on edge. Just to give you an example, we go into our homes and we're being hit with our own Wi-Fi network. We're being hit by the 5G outside. And every cell of our body is always trying to interpret what's going on in the world around us for epigenetic reasons. I mean, our body is trying to make sure that our best self shows up. And unfortunately, what happens, because we're being exposed to things in this last 20 years that these bodies have never seen. So we go into what's called the cell danger response. But then once we get relaxing with BrainTap, we're using earth frequencies that our body has been used to since the dawn of creation, right? We're talking about 10 cycles is the frequency of water, where mountains are 7.8 frequency, which is theta. So you got alpha and theta, and those are two brain frequencies. When we measure people, and we've measured thousands of brains, like over 30,000 brains in the last 10 years. Since we've had the equipment to do that in a very quick way, 5 minutes, a device called the NeuroCheck. And what we're finding is that most people are really in an inflamed state, in an inflammation state. And it really causes the brain to have inflammation when our body does, because our brain gets 20% of the energy. So it's trying to get it. And if you're in this high beta, which is the stress state, and then you're in high delta, which is the body trying to say, hey, go to sleep. You're stressed out. Let's heal and repair. But what we do is we push on because we're good Americans, and we only know the only way we believe the only way we're going to succeed is by doing. I love the Maharishi. He said, do much, get little done, do nothing, get it all done. That was his favorite saying,
I love it.
A totally different attitude than what, the Western culture has.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Oh my gosh. I mean, like, what is actually occurring to, when you talk about brainwave entrainment,
Right.
I view it like, I play guitar, I've played for years. And if you take an A string on one guitar and you pluck it and you stick it next to the other guitar, the A string on the other guitar will start vibrating.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is that what
Yeah.
you're doing? Is you're kind of syncing our brainwaves to be in a more favorable state?
Yeah, and what's cool about our body, every cell does this, but our brain does it even more because it has more mitochondria than the rest of the body. But what it's doing is it has something called mirror neurons. And as an athlete, if you could see somebody do something, you probably have the spatial awareness that you can imitate it.
Yeah.
Well, that's because of our mirror neurons. Our body actually begins to believe you're that person. There's actually techniques that teach this in coaching and sports psychology. But every cell is doing that all the time. So they call it epigenetics. So our body is always looking at its environment. So if you're near a body of water, it knows, hey, we're safe. If we're far away from water, there's a certain agitation that happens because we need water. Our body is 80% water. So it's already inside of us. So then when we're next to it, they start vibrating together like that A string. Or if you're using tuning forks, you could think of that analogy too. And then when we look at a mountain, or there's minerals inside of us, right? And so those minerals vibrate to the frequency of the mountains. And this happens all the time. We walk into an environment, whether it's on sea level or in the mountains, doesn't matter. The body says, hey, what's going on around us? And now we know through epigenetics, 99% of our DNA changes every 40 seconds. So what we're doing is we're changing that frequency of change. It happens all the time, whether you're listening to BrainTap or not. What we're doing is we're setting, like, if you've ever done or heard of people doing like these ayahuasca journeys or psilocybin journeys, they talk about set and setting. Well, it's also important when you talk about meditation. But the problem is most people just plunk themselves down on their couch or maybe in their bed, or they don't, and then their environment plays into that or feeds back into it. What we're doing with BrainTap is we're putting on the headset. So we're blocking out the eyes, we're blocking out the ears, and then we introduce frequencies through the ears too, because that light that's in the ears, it's actually broadcasting Auger frequencies and keeps changing. So the body keeps adapting to those frequencies, keeps adapting to the light frequencies. And we can talk a little bit more about that if we want to, but it's called frequency following response is the science. And it happens all the time in music, especially. If you have somebody there who, let's say you go to a party and you don't really want to be there, but they start playing all the music from your childhood, your toe starts tapping, you start swaying, your cells literally fill up with energy because we have these things on every cell called a chromophore. Our mitochondria is bacteria. It's not even us. It's starving. It absorbs light energy. And then its job is, once it's full of light energy, it broadcasts that light energy out. This is part of what's called the biophotic system, which is now a new system that they didn't even know about before 2003. And they kind of know more about it now in 2018, that it's controlling the system. Science in the National Institute of Health, which blew my mind a few years ago, actually came out and said that we have a biosphere, which means our aura. In metaphysics, and if I was to say that out loud 20 years ago, I would never get on a stage again. They would think I was crazy. But now, because the National Institute of Health is saying, hey, you have this energy, we're energy beings. So when you think of, and it's always developing, it thinks it's doing the right thing for you when you're stressed out because people live in that space all the time. So the subconscious doesn't know good or bad, evil or whatever. It just knows, hey, this is the way you wake up in the morning, this is the way you operate. And until you interrupt that pattern, the subconscious keeps playing it out. I love Dennis Waitley. He wrote a book called a lot of books about self-esteem and self-confidence, and he calls it Seeds of Greatness. But inside of us, we have the potential for greatness, but the problem is that we trained our subconscious mind and then we allowed it to train us. We need to upgrade that thinking, because what we learned, and most people will tell you, before you're 11 years old, you have a fixed operating system. Well, I don't believe that anymore, because all you have to do is get back into those brainwave states. When you talk about brainwave entrainment, before that time, your predominant brainwaves were alpha, theta, and delta. Now we've introduced beta and gamma as we age. By the time we're 55, 60 years old, we should have a lot of more gamma going on, because that's the bass drum of the brain. If we don't, we get dementia and Alzheimer's. That's why all the research is about 40 hertz frequency. That's gamma. In the brain, as in our life cycle as humans, what happens is stress dysregulates this brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. You just pinged me on like 10 different things, rabbit holes I'd love to go down. But it's very clear that we are all just like ping-ponging from one stressful event to the next. I mean, I think we all have some sort of PTSD from the pandemic. I mean, we're still suffering from that. And the point is, with your device, I think if anyone is listening to this, like the crux of it to me is that you can be a victim of the environment that is already set up for you to pretty much be stressed, or you can create a practice based on science, on something that works, to train yourself to stay as much as possible in that place that is more optimal, like you're saying, where the alpha and the theta and the delta, right? I mean, it goes basically gamma's the highest, right? And then beta is what we're in. We're in beta kind of conversation and energy. And then you have alpha, which is more of your flow state-ish, meditative state, right? Then theta is kind of like your REM state. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, we call it the inventive state when you're awake. That's when you kind of get those spontaneous breakthroughs and things like that. They say they derive because you're so close to the subconscious at that point. Delta is subconscious. You don't know what's going on there. You could even call it unconscious, when you're in that deep level 4 sleep.
Yeah. I heard this thing. I think it was Thomas Edison. He used to, in his laboratory, had a couch he would take naps on. Have you heard this? And
yes.
Hold his keys while he napped, so that when while he was chewing on a problem, his keys, when he fell asleep, would fall on the ground and wake him up, and he would be able to retrieve and solve that problem. Is that what you're talking about with this theta wave state?
Yeah. In my book, Awaken the Genius, I mentioned at least 6 different super geniuses like that. And they all had strategy. Like Einstein had what he called thought experiment. Before he would figure out a problem, he would go into his brain and create a scenario, like flying on a photon through space. That's where he thought of the theory of relativity. He did that through his imagination first. That's why he said, imagination is more powerful than knowledge, because knowledge gives us limitations. Imagination has no limit.
Yeah.
He also said that about stupidity. Imagination has limits, but stupidity doesn't. There's all these quotes by him that I love. I think the main thing is that people don't realize that they can build capacity. Just like as an athlete, when you didn't go out right away and become an Olympic athlete, you had to build up that capacity to even perform, because I'm sure you were really good in the gym at first, and you had to go perform in front of people. That's a whole nother skill set, because now you're thinking about your judges and things like that, not outside yourself. So you got to bring yourself back into your center and do that. Those things are all mental practices. And I always tell people, could you imagine watching the Olympics and they never practiced? I mean, that'd be a sad Olympics, right? But people go out into their own life and they never practice or rehearse, never consider what the possibilities are. And then they complain when they do the same thing over and over and over again. They never take that time. So I always tell people, don't pray to remove your stress. Pray to build your capacity so you can handle that, because those that can handle the capacity, they're the real leaders in this world. When the pressure's on the line, if you can stay composed and you can stay in a solution mindset instead of a problem mindset, your subconscious will give you the answer. It's a very powerful biocomputer. It can do incredible things for us.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about Olympics and all that stuff, when I was making my first Olympic team, it's abundantly clear to me what separates the top athletes, the Olympians, the elite, is the mind. Everybody on the field can do the physicality. There's some genetic differences, and some people are better or more gifted in certain ways. But really, if you want to be at the elite level, which means that you can do your craft repeatably under any sort of circumstance or any pressure, you're completely reliable. You have to master your emotions and your mind. And I used everything when I was doing that, from visualization to breathing techniques, meditation. Hypnotherapy was a big one for me. I was so nervous on this one apparatus. I don't know why. That one I was just so nervous, and I was great at it. But I had to do hypnotherapy to retrain my subconscious so that when I approached that event, I approached it with the same enthusiasm of, yes, let's do this, as the other events. And the first time I ever tried your product, BrainTap, at a conference, I think maybe a Bulletproof conference, I said, oh my God, this reminds me of hypnotherapy. Like, it has that component to it because it's suggestive in ways, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but while you're training the brain waves to get them into this state, you're also affirming a lot of positive and talk that is in line with being in that brainwave state. It's fascinating.
Right. Yeah. What we tell people, we don't use the term hypnosis because people have a misconception about it, but we use positive psychology. You'll notice that mine are not statements of fact for you. They're questions, because we want you to find the solution. You'll never argue with your own information. So if I can get you thinking about your future in a way that you like it, and that's why people like listening to our sessions over and over again, because they're not telling you what to do. They're teaching you how to think. That's the biggest thing. And I know, I'm a psychologist, so I know about hypnosis, and I would use it at times, especially to help people with childhood trauma and things like that, because it's a great way to clear out, negative memories, things of that nature. I think it's a powerful technique. It's just that we use the light, sound, and vibration to do that. We don't need to do those formal trances, because these are natural states, just like hypnosis is natural. I mean, people drive across town all the time and they go, how'd I get here? Well, they were in that that driving trance, that you see down the LA freeway,
and then you're like, where was I for the last 5 minutes? I have no idea where I was.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're going into that kind of super state where you're there, but you're not there. Your mind can do many things. I mean, right now you're doing incredible things that you aren't aware of, like your heart's beating, you're breathing, you're metabolizing your lunch, all of these things are happening and you don't give it a second thought. So your brain can only do 7 plus or minus things. And when you're driving down the road and you've mastered that. Now, when you first learned to drive, you didn't do that, right? You were so vigilant. And then after a while, you had to have 2 hands on the wheel. After a while, you got your bottle of water, you're talking to your friends, you're singing along with the radio, you're looking all around. You don't remember the last time you looked in front of you, because you're just cruising down the road.
Yeah. And it goes back to like what you were saying. You've built capacity for driving. Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a good way of looking at it. I think I'm going to kind of take that nugget with me as I use BrainTap, because it is, I do feel like I'm building capacity to be more resilient, to stay more in that balanced state without the anxiety. I just went away for a trip, and I didn't bring it because I thought I'll just use my headphones, and I just fell off for like a few days. And I could tell after that trip, I was like, dang it. I'm bringing it every single time moving forward, because it's like working out. If you stop working out, the body will stop, adapting to your favorable response and start adapting to the negative response,
I showed people in my most recent conferences, they asked me to show what happens during a plane flight. And so I have a series of scans that I did on myself, we did this with pilots as well. And, I tell people it's kind of like what Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get hit. And so flying in an airplane, even though I fly in an airplane very well, I mean, you could be flying upside down, it probably wouldn't bother me. I don't even know because I fly so much, but I was shocked because I'm usually 100% across the board. I regulate as a 31-year-old, all these things because, I'm doing what I know to do. And I've been doing it for years, eating healthy, moving and breathing, doing my BrainTap and other things that I do. I do TM meditation as well with my BrainTap usually just to get to gamma faster and things like that. But when I get on that airplane, and I did this intentionally, not doing BrainTap on the airplane. I wanted to see what happened because usually I'll do something on the airplane if it's a cross-country trip because I know what happens to the brain. When I landed, I went from North Carolina to California. I dropped 60%. And I went from being a 31-year-old to regulating as a 54-year-old. I'm 62. So it was a big drop. And, it basically ages you. So the stress and what I found when I did the research about this for the pilots that we worked with, an hour in the air is like an x-ray. Ugh. So even though you're just sitting there reading your book or watching a movie or taking a nap, your body's moving at 500 miles an hour at 31,000 feet. And your body's going, what the heck? It still thinks it's in the Serengeti. It doesn't know that you pick up. And what I tell people, it's light zones. Every cell of your body is taking cues from the sun. And these are frequencies, actually. So just like there's stars out there that they call them pulse stars, they pulse. Our star is pulsing and it's sending really electrical information to our bodies. For instance, if you don't get to sleep before 12 o'clock, you don't make as much melatonin. But every hour before 12, you make twice as much. So if somebody's not sleeping well, I say, even though it's difficult at first, start sleeping at 10 o'clock and just do breathing exercises until you fall asleep. And pretty soon your brain will start acting as if that's your bedtime and get up earlier. It's better to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning instead of 6 maybe and go to bed 2 hours earlier. And you'll now some people get away with it fine. They go to bed at 12 or even 1 o'clock and they have great sleep scores. And you don't have to change then. But if you don't know what's going on, then that might be the problem.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of people with sleep problems. I mean, some people. I'm lucky. I've always slept pretty good. I kind of view sleep as a habit. When it's on, it wants to stay on. When it's off, it wants to stay off. And I always tell people, guard your sleep like a bulldog, because like if you drink too many fluids before you go to bed and you wake up in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. whatever, and you go to the bathroom, if you do that once, you have a really good chance of waking up at that same time the next night for no reason. You know what I mean? And so
there is a reason for that. Let me tell
yeah, please.
You should be able to drink a gallon of water and go to sleep and never wake up. Your liver, your kidneys have a circulating pump, so you should be fine. But what happens is at 2 o'clock in the morning, between 2 and 3, your temperature is going to increase 2 degrees. When your brain's dysregulated, if it goes to 3 degrees, you're waking up. If it goes to 4 degrees, you're sweating and you're wondering what's going on. And then depending upon how your psychology is at that moment, your mindset, then you might start thinking and stressing. And then the brain starts the pattern. And you're exactly right. It will start a pattern. It'll say, this is the way I do it. I wake up in the middle of the night, go to the bathroom, and you don't have to. I mean, and I learned that from one of our doctors, and we started experimenting with it. And sure enough, once people started getting into that deep delta, they would not wake up at night anymore.
Yeah. And that monkey brain of just cycling, you wake up in the middle at 3 a.m. and next thing you know, you're going through your to-do list. And that's a hard habit to break, in this day and age. One of the little hacks that I try when I go to sleep, because sometimes my brain always wants to think, what am I going to do tomorrow? And I just said, I always ask myself, how does it feel to be in this bed? Like I put myself into my senses. Does it feel nice? Doesn't it feel nice? Or what's the, and if I do that instead of getting in my brain and thinking about thoughts, I usually can fall asleep pretty well, but
Those
man,
are good questions. The worst question you ask yourself is, why am I not sleeping? Because then the
yeah,
brain thinks that's a problem to solve. It'll start making you sleep less.
yeah,
Then, if you say, I love those questions you're asking yourself, because then your brain acts as if those
yeah.
things are happening.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Get back to the athletics and being an elite performer. I used to tell people when I coached them, like the parents, I was like, when you get up, the kid has a competition that day. Don't wake up and be like, "How do you feel today?" Like, don't start asking them. You feel like you're going to do good? Like, stop that. You're putting them in their head, and you're making them think about the future and anticipation and results. And you can't think about any of that stuff if you want to be an ass kicker on the playing field. You got to be in the now. And that's what I think with sleep and stress, it's kind of related to that. You got to stay in the now, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, sleep is where you incubate those superpowers. So if you don't have a lot of people, in fact, one of the tennis pros, John Eisner, he wouldn't perform well at night. And so he asked me to help him. And so we had him do a session in the afternoon because we tend to run out of energy. And then if he didn't perform well, of course he wouldn't sleep, then he wouldn't perform well in the morning.
Yeah.
So you've got to you got to find out where your cycles are. Now, when he was younger, of course, he didn't have that problem. So, the biological system is going to, we all have those lows, but everybody drops in temperature in the afternoon as well. So we have those natural lows. So I remember there was one of the Olympians used their BrainTap on the sidelines in the last Olympics. I thought that was cool that they were doing it because they needed a reboot. And, so there's people that understand it. And really it's about energy management, right? If you
Yeah.
start stressing and worrying, it's almost like you grounded all your natural energy and you don't get it anymore. But
Yeah.
if you can stay positive, it circulates, you stay in that flow state and you're able to operate at that highest level.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about this test you said that because you've tested me at a conference, my nervous system, and then I do the brain tap, and then you test my nervous system again. And I was 20 years younger brain when after brain tap. Can you explain what is this age as it relates to this test
Right.
exactly?
What they did is, let's say that we took what we've done with our Russian partners who created the device. They have the patents on HRV. So in the HRV itself, where you're measuring between the heartbeats, there's something called the RR function. There's 7 frequencies. Everything in our body, everything in the world, in the universe is vibrating and teeming with energy and frequency. So it has a signature. So for the astronauts in our space program, they needed a way to get their vitals without sending up big EEG machines and things. So this is what they've discovered since the 70s. I mean, they've been validating the software. And so what we do is we took, let's say it was a 20-year-old, we have let's say 10,000 20-year-olds, and that's the case in industrial nations. We've been selling this equipment for 10 years. They've been doing a lot more. So between all the industrialized nations, everyone who's a 30-year-old is put into a category, not their name, but just they're there. So you're being compared against all the biological markers of a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old. So when you come in, when you show up, it'll say you show up more like a 21-year-old than a 31-year-old, or you show up more like a 40-year-old than a 60-year-old. Like I was saying, I show up as a 31-year-old. So even when I flew across the country, I was still better than people my age. I'm thinking, how bad are these? Because they're, of course, if you just left it up to chance, and you just ate all the junk, what they call the SAD diet, the standard American diet, you're going to be in bad shape because nutrition, especially if you eat on the airplane, there's a lot of rules that, you want to, I don't eat typically when I fly. I do drink a lot of water. I try to drink at least, 8 ounces of water every hour. And I did all those things. I did all the things I know, all the neuro hacks, but it still wasn't enough. You've
Yeah.
got to do something when you land to reset. And what I say is reset your light zone, because the sun, your body doesn't know where it's at in space and time. I mean, our body doesn't understand, because it's only been the last 100 years that we've been able to pick ourselves up from one part of the world and put ourselves on the other in the same day. I mean, when I flew to London, I just was there for the Optimum Health Summit, and I flew in that morning and had to speak that afternoon. And people were like, I thought you just flew in today. You don't seem like that. I said, that's because I'm in this time zone. Because when I flew over, I did a session. When I landed, I did a session. I was right back to 100% before I got on stage. If I'd have left it up to chance, I would have had a lot of excuses and I could have done a terrible job, if people
Yeah.
would have agreed to it. And that's what athletes, like when we're working with TB12 and things, that's one of the biggest things that I showed them was, look, these professional athletes like yourself, you're flying around the world competing and you go, man, I nailed that back home in my gym. And here I am, 500 miles away and I can't do it. Or the physical, it's not there. It's because your biological system hasn't been tuned up. And the brain is part of that tune up process. And not just the mindset, it's physiologically, we've got to tune that up with light, sound, and vibration.
Yeah, I mean, traveling internationally and trying to do something where you're on the razor edge of performance is it is so difficult. I mean, you have to be so good to do it without these additional tools. I wish I would have had BrainTap when I was competing. I look back and I'm like, oh, all the stuff that I've learned in the last 15 years I could have used when I was a professional athlete. But it is fascinating, how your, not only like your stress level and your brain waves and signature, but how it makes you feel, but it's your perception of the world. I mean, whether you're a negative person or a positive person, forget just trying to be an elite, a high performer. I mean, that's great. And we all want to aspire to that. But just to be a person whose subjective well-being, I feel happy. I feel content. I feel like the world isn't going to end tomorrow. You know what I mean? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I've had a number of occasions using your BrainTap where tears are streaming down my face because I came into it with something that I was just, and it absolved me in some way of that. It's very powerful. I mean, what are some of the things that you guys have seen in that realm in terms of maybe, not just peak performance, but people with maybe tendencies for certain ailments?
Yeah, I mean, if you think of the amygdala, this is that part of the brain, that primitive brain that takes over when we get angry. And then we later go, man, I wish I would have not been angry. I would have said things differently or done things differently. But we feel like we've been hijacked. Well, we have, because the emotional brain is different than our logical brain. We don't make, like the old saying goes, we don't make emotion. We make emotional decisions, then we justify them with our logic. But the reality is that what we find with BrainTap, once you get rid of the extra energy and you start balancing out those brain waves, and when we talk about you ran through the brain waves, there's a we call it a symphony of brain waves, because no one brain wave is important is more important than the other. It's what are you going to do during, like if I was performing at a high level as an elite athlete, you have two choices. You can downregulate and have a high amount of alpha and have beta. These are two brainwaves, because when you're performing, especially gymnast, you have to have spatial awareness. You have a spatial awareness that other people don't have. You can flip around in space and nail your feet on flat on the floor. And people, it looks so easy on television. Everybody thinks I'm going to get my grandkids to do that and they're going to be the next Olympian. But it takes a special. I'm fortunate. My grandson is a very good athlete. He's an all-star in everything he does. And I remember him in the pool when he was just 3 years old. He goes, look, Grampy, and he does a flip. And I sent it to his parents. He goes, what are you teaching him a flip for? I said, I didn't teach him how to do that. I thought you guys did. But he's one of those guys that just can look at somebody as a spatial awareness. And he was watching his sister, who's the older sister, do soccer. And the coach is going, do this, do this. And then Eli goes by doing it. And he goes, do what he's doing, because Eli just needs to see it once. He's got those mirror neurons, that spatial awareness. But if you're stressed out, it's almost like you put a governor on top of that natural ability. And that's why when you talked about being positive, if you have an optimistic bias, there's actually a book called that, because if you look at life as a series of challenges rather than threats, your biological system shows up better. But if you look at life as that's why performance anxiety, when you think of people that, and I didn't coach gymnastics, but I coached track and football in high school. And I could have a practice player. We called them practice players because in practice, they were world beaters. You put them out there on the field, and all of a sudden they're not the same person because they crush. And I had a brother like that. I remember when I had my house in college, I had 6 guys living there, and because I've always been a kind of an entrepreneur guy and I didn't want to pay my own rent. So I got a house big enough and rented rooms out. And I had a pool table there, and he had lost his job and he wanted to eat. And he was beating me really bad because he wasn't working. He's practicing all the time. So I said, David, let's play for a can of soup. I beat him all night long. He could not beat me because I knew all I had to do was put a little money on the line, a can of soup. And so
Yeah.
that's where you have to imitate that stress environment so your body learns how to operate in it. But if that's the people, like, they get into that zone. And when we look at the professional athletes and probably elite athletes, you probably noticed on yours you had a high amount of gamma,
Yeah.
because when you have that high amount of gamma, you're operating in a super state. It's even better than the theta state, because in that gamma state, now you're operating in the energy flow is tremendous. Like when you look at a basketball player, it looks like they're just dribbling down there and just passing the ball. Well, they're doing high level physics while they're running. I mean, this is pretty tough stuff. They don't think about it. And then they'll get in the classroom and think they're not very smart. Well, they're physiologically smart. They might not be psychologically smart or smart in English and math, but their body is able to do those things. And it's really a brainwave activity, because as soon as you put stress into the equation and that brainwave profile changes, you don't perform the same. So think of brainwaves. I always tell people, think of brainwaves like healthy Wi-Fi network, and they all work together. As an example, when we work with autistic children, and it could work with an autistic adult too, but we did our test with autistic children. We showed them, as soon as we got their alpha activity up to about 23% with Dr. Joquita Handy out of Orange County, she found that about 90% of them started speaking, and they were nonverbal, because the alpha is part of the speech profile. So when you think about somebody who has a fear of public speaking, because when they get up, they can't think, that's because their stress profile increased and they lost all alpha activity. They became high beta. So, we can show these things now that in science where we didn't have them before, and then you can train to that. Like, there's a lot of different trainings you can do to increase your alpha activity.
Interesting. I would love your input on this, since you're here, a perfect person to ask. I trained, I was 12 years elite level pro athlete. And I feel like since I've retired from sport, I have this ability where I need to be, that's the reason why I started this podcast. I need something that puts me in the now, cameras on, a crowd of people, something that's where I feel normal. And without it, life seems very boring and mundane to me. Like I'm just like, so I'm always trying to challenge myself to be the guy that when someone says, hey, I need a volunteer, I'm like, I'm here, I'm your guy, But have I trained my brainwaves to be to want to be at a certain thing, or what is going on there?
You're lucky. I mean, you're very fortunate, because I was just going over this with the team at TB12, because this is what happens with athletes when they leave the arena, right? Whatever it is, you're there, you're used to people clapping and applauding you, and now you're no longer there. You just brushed your teeth, combed your hair, and nobody's applauding. You've made it, so to speak. So unfortunately, a lot of people turn toward the negative because they don't know how to fill that void. So and that's a brain profile, because that's a hyper vigilant. Now, you were an athlete doing it in a fun sport, but think of it, the same thing's true with PTSD. On the negative side of that, the brain's doing the same profile, but in PTSD, this hyper vigilance, like you're in a theater of war now. And used to be we'd send our soldiers once, and then they'd come home, and then we'd have to deal with shell shock. That's what they call it. Now we send them back 3 and 4 times and expect them to integrate back into real life without any training of the brain. So the brain gets this hyper vigilance. Like when you're performing, you're in the zone. Nothing else matters. But if you do that with your girlfriend or your wife, that relationship's not going to work, because they want you to notice them. They want you to compliment them. Or your friends are going to say you're self-absorbed. But if you're, especially if it's a sport like gymnastics, and it's a team sport, but you're really performing on your own. Nobody's out there doing it for you. And it's not like an outside linebacker. You slip and your defensive back covers for you. You're out there on an island. And so depending upon your level of activity. So part of it is, that's part of what I'm telling them is we need to teach the vet. Like that's what we teach the vets is we need to change those. We can't erase those neural pathways. That's impossible. But what we can do is overwrite them. So that means as you do things like the podcast, as you do things like getting up on stage and talking or sharing your story, or when you go out and you help people, whatever you're giving. We did an experiment with Daji. He's a guru in India, and he has a thing called heartfelt meditation. And we measured what was happening with that. And what you do is you set in meditation and you broadcast energy from your heart to another person. It's just a kind of and that's their whole meditation. there's nothing else to it. I mean, that's as sophisticated as it gets. But we measured them, and what we showed them, and he had me fly out to Hyderabad to do in front of 75,000 people and show them the science, because we showed that the people giving the energy got more of the energy than the person they were sending it to. They got better results.
Oh, wow.
So as you're doing, so when you're performing, you're getting a payoff, in other words.
Yeah.
And then if you don't find a way to fill that payoff void, some people will turn to negative things. Like, I'm sure you know Olympic level athletes that you were performing with them, doing a great job, and now you go and go, what's going on, man? You're living with your parents, or you're on the streets, and they didn't make that transition like you did. So I think we need to have more support for people like that, because these elite level, you're the 1% of the 1%. Very few people make it. If you take all the people that do gymnastics when they're little, I don't think very many of them get to the Olympics, right?
So, only 6 every 4 years, so I mean, by definition. So I mean, I could not agree with you more. I feel like there's no deprogramming for athletes. Okay, you're done. And for me, it was so hard because I retired at 31. I was an adult. I started at 9. I didn't even know anything else. I grew up as a gymnast. And I remember being like, I'm content. I did everything. Like, literally, I was in TV shows. I was in movies. I did Victoria's Secret's fashion shows. I was in museums. I performed on every continent except for Antarctica. I made it to Olympics, I was like, I'm done. I'm happy to be done. But I remember one time I got out of the car. I was going to my place, and all of a sudden I started like tunneling, like black, like I was going into a tunnel, and I couldn't breathe, and I started freaking out. And I remember thinking, something's happening to me physiologically that is separate than my consciousness saying I'm happy to be done. And I ended up going down a path for 5 years of abusing alcohol and my body, and just being like, I'm done. And I mean, that's why I don't drink anymore. I've been sober for almost, 14, 15 years, whatever. And I got, what I did was I quit drinking, and I went into the theater in Los Angeles, and I studied theatrical acting, because I said, I need something that puts me on that stage again. And it was
great.
Yeah, it really helped me. I did it for a couple of years. I had an Oscar, guy who wrote an Oscar-winning movie. He was a director. He launched a lot of famous actors. He found me in there, and he wrote a movie for me. We almost got it made, and the pandemic happened and everything just shut down. But it really was therapeutic for me. And you talk about those mirror cells. Acting has that too. Like, if you act with someone who's really good, and that person has emotion, if you look at them and you connect with them, you will feel that same emotion. So you'll always be better acting with someone who's better, right? Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, but
that's an important thing, because what happens, and I wrote about this, and I have a book called Discover the Language of the Mind. We have a technique called unlimited reality, and it's where you pretend you're someone else, and then, because you want their skill set. People do this all the time. We just broke it up into a technique called the unlimited reality, because some people look at someone like you, and they're a gymnast, they said, he does it, but I can't. And then automatically those mirror neurons turn off. But if you look at somebody and say, wow, because they did it, I can do it. I just have to learn what they're thinking, how they're acting, how they're responding. And that's how like these actors do. They'll go like, Robert De Niro going to be a cab driver for 6 months before he played the role in, that movie. They get into character. And some people they end one phase of their life to the next, and they don't know how to act. Yeah. And I heard that over and over again with addiction. Like when somebody says, I'm a smoker, or I'm an alcoholic, or I'm an Olympic athlete. You're not a behavior. The number 1 law of psychology states you can't be a behavior. But people all these labels we're given. We're infinite beings with potential that is untapped. We don't know what we can do. I mean, when you look at what you've done in the Olympics, and you look back, I still remember in high school going back, I wanted to go back to the Olympics to when I could have won the quarter mile. Well, that would be pretty hard for a man. But I found out in 1956, I could have won the women's Olympics. So today I'm really, I could have went back in time and done it today. So it's like, we've so progressed. Like a lot of people use the 4-minute mile as the marker, but as a culture, as a human civilization, we're realizing that we're very much just touching the tip of our potential. And we're using all of our capacity that we have available right now. So if we build that capacity, like acting is a capacity, right? You take a left brain cerebral professor who's in English and sciences, and you put them in the theater room, they'll get the willies. They'll go, this is freaky. They won't know how to do it right. And that was one of the things my dad used to do with Silva is you would project yourself into a tree. Of course, this is craziness, right? But you'd project yourself into a tree. What does that feel like? What's it like when your roots go into the ground? And you're just expanding consciousness, and it helps you to learn and grow. And there'd always be that person in the room that would say, you can't do that. We're saying you don't have to do it. We're asking you to imagine. There's an experiment that I always did with my clients. I said, imagine we're at a cliff and we're looking out. It's beautiful. You can see the vistas. It's the sun shining. And then you jump. What happened? And most of them will say, I hit the ground, splat. And I go, it's a dream. You can do whatever you want. You could have sprouted wings and flown but in their own consciousness, even in their own inner workings of their mind, they put limitations. So we're not trained to do that. Like when you say, I'm trained to be an Olympic athlete, then no longer, it's a grieving process, really, because it's just like when you're in a relationship with somebody and you've been with them for so long, then you break up, and maybe it was because of a death or something happened. Your brain doesn't know how to act, because you projected this future. Like when you're 9 years old and you're projecting this future as a gymnast, and then you got some successes along the way, then you become an Olympic athlete, then you say, oh no, this body, it can't keep doing this. We're 31 now, we've climbed every mountain, we've done everything, but your consciousness still says, wait a minute, I'm only 4 years old. I'm only in fourth grade. That's your subconscious talking. It says, why can't we do these things anymore? It doesn't care what your body can do. It only knows what it's been planning. And you just changed the whole program. That takes a lot of energy. That's why when people go, why do they use BrainTap? Well, we're going to feed energy into the brain so you can get that neuroplastic change. And you had to rewire your whole brain, because I'm sure that you were consumed by it. I mean, when I saw what people like Mark Spitz and the others eat when they're swimming, if you ate like that, if you weren't swimming all day, you'd be big as a barn, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it looked like a family of 48 people could have eaten that meal,
Yeah, totally.
So people do that all the time, right? They get into sports and they get out and they keep eating the same way but they're not doing the same performance level.
Yeah. I mean, I've probably said this many times on this podcast, and maybe people are sick of it, but when I retired as a professional athlete and got lost for 5 years, and then now I'm sort of this, whatever I am, some sort of health, person, I decided that I wanted to live the life of a professional athlete. I wasn't performing. Like I said,
right.
Why would I throw away all of that stuff that I learned how to be and do? I want to live the habits as though I am preparing for that big competition. And then at the same time, try to create mirrors of a competition, like being on a podcast or getting on a stage or doing things like that put me a little bit in the now, but man, I tell you, it really is. I'm so glad that we had this conversation about this stuff, because you can go down some dark avenues if you don't give yourself a little bit of compassion as to, hey, it's okay. There was a point where I said, being an Olympic athlete is a disease. I mean, there's a movie out right now, came out a while ago, called The Weight of Gold. Do you know this one with Michael Phelps? And I thought they pushed a little hard on, like poor us, at being an Olympian. But at the same time, it made me go, yeah, a lot of this stuff is true, But well, we don't have to beat that horse anymore. But it was.
I think the main thing is that I do believe that we want to live a life with peak performance moments, and we want to show up for those, because if let's say a significant other, or we're having a big event, we want to show up. We're all performing all the time, whether it's somebody going to the grocery store and having to pick up their grocery bags and put them in there. If they don't prepare themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, that's when they can throw out their back. Could be that simple, so, like getting in ready position and all those things that we learn in sports, those are really important steps. And I think people that don't do sports, like I'm very fortunate, my grandkids love sports and things, and we don't get to see them as much as we can. I had to explain to my wife, because she wasn't a sports person, really. I said, this is much better, because I was into all sports. I wasn't Olympic level, but I was I was a 3-sport captain in high school and ran track in college. But that changed me, because if I wasn't doing those things, we do need to, but how do you translate it? I think a lot of athletes don't realize that you have to take that, it's a metaphor.
Yeah.
And especially when it becomes a memory, it becomes more and more of a metaphor, because now you probably look back at it and did it really happen? I know I have pictures and I have medals and I have all these things, but you're a different person now than you were then.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to always kind of relate things to gymnastics where, just running my own business, sometimes I find myself stepping into the office and not really doing work, not really having a goal that day, and I'm just wasting time. And then I go to the weight room at the gym and it is pure business. I mean, the moment I walk in, it is like there's not a shred of time that I'm not on the playing field, so to speak, and have a purpose and know exactly what I'm doing and getting the job done. And I'm always like, how do I relate this? Like, how do I show up the exact same way in my business? But getting back to the BrainTap, it has allowed me to step away from the sort of haze of stress and be able to take almost a step back and really look at, okay, how do I architect my day, and what is it that I really want to do, from a place of non-stress? Because a year can evaporate where you just ping ponged from one stressful task to another,
Right.
Yeah. I mean, let's
Yep.
let's talk a little bit about the BrainTap experience, because I want people to kind of understand, like, okay, what is happening? I put this thing on. What am I hearing and what am I seeing?
Well, the sounds are binaural beats, isochronic tones, and frequencies, and they're all frequencies that have been proven in science. I'm not making anything up. These have all been validated without. So they're all really good on their own. You've probably seen them. What we've done is we've looked at the EEG and we've tracked the brainwave. So then we synchronized that. I thought, what if we did that with light? Candles flicker at 10 hertz frequency. So if you look at a candle meditation, what happens is the mirror neurons start to create 10 cycle information in the brain. Then you get into alpha. That's why candles are relaxing. And then I thought, okay, what about, we had some of our doctors using lasers in the ears because of meridians there. And I thought, what about photobiomodulation? What if we broadcast Nogier frequencies that change every 2 minutes? So every time, all of these things are happening at once. So that creates the environment. Then once that environment's set, we're going to play some music in there. We know something called the Mozart effect, which is when you play this 10 cycle music, which also happens to be alpha, your brain balances and you just become smarter. I mean, you could play that in your offices. If you're listening to this, just go online, pick out some Mozart music, and when you're working, you'll just be smarter. You'll have more creativity. But what we found was when you turn that music off, that effect changes. And we put our algorithm into that music. It takes 72 hours to revert back to your stress brain profile. And this algorithm that I've created, that's kind of my secret sauce. I've been working on it since 86. So it's not something I just decided, hey, I'm going to learn about binaural beats or whatever. And we worked with the Monroe Institute at first, but because some people get hooked into their own thing, I always tell people, if I found something better than BrainTap, you'd see me with that, because I'm not in love with the technology. I'm in love with the result. I want to get results. I want my people to get results. This just happens to be what I know right now is the best way to get there. There might be something better, and we're looking at virtual reality to do it because they already have the headset, and there's ways to use that. But when you put those together and you get in the right brain state where you have what's called hypermnesia, this is super memory states. Our brain has it. There's so much research about it. The problem is that they think there's only a select number of people that can get into that brain state because they do it naturally. There are people out there that have photographic memories and didactic memories. We have creative savants. You give them a problem, they can create a solution. They can figure out math problems, all those things. I believe everyone can do that. We just haven't unlocked that capacity. Then we add words to it. Now, we have over 500 sessions that are just music in the process, because some people want to do their own meditations, and that's fine. But what I tell them is your best thinking brought you here. Congratulations. If you want an upgrade, we need to change your thinking. Most people running around today, and this is just an average, 60,000 thoughts a day, 40,000 are negative. Now, this is because our reticular activating system, our default mode network, is one of survival. And this is because these bodies are the genetic makeup of our ancestors. And it wasn't too long ago that we might wake up in the morning and not make sundown because we were part of the food chain, because we're out there doing our thing. Now we're pretty safe, but, there is still death out there. We could get in a car accident today or whatever. But you and I, our genetics made it from the very beginning of time. We're here. we're the genetic beneficiaries of somebody who has great interpretations of light, sound, and vibration, because all of creation operates on this principle. So if you have the good acuity, if you have good skills in all these different sensory-based systems, that's why there's this, why we keep improving, because the best genetics moves forward, and the other genetics falls off, and it keeps improving and adjusting. So then we add words. We know that all of these things change your epigenetic profile, but words specifically change 2,600 gene expression. So if you want to change your thinking, you've got to change your internal dialogue. And it's not about somebody telling you what to think. That's the problem most people have in the world today. They get up in the morning, they don't know how they feel. Like you're talking about talking to the parents, don't ask them how they're feeling, whatever, because then they're basically presupposing something. And then they have a bias. That person has a bias. They don't know what to respond. But if you said, wow, today's an exciting day, you look great, let's get ready. You give them affirmative statements, then the brain starts acting out that equation rather than, hey, how you feeling? You going to be okay today? And the emotion, whatever that is, and then, or the mother goes, you look like you're a little weak. Let's get you some cornflakes, and, they don't know that that's crushing their, with best intentions in the world, but they just don't know what they're doing. So that's why we ask questions, and the what's, the where's, the with whom's. You'll hear in that double voice kind of process where we're keeping the brain active, because once you learn at one level, I want to teach people to operate at such a high level that when they return back to their everyday world, it's stress-free.
Yeah.
That's why we're building capacity. Like when you were working out to perform at the highest level, you worked a lot harder during your practice than you did during the performance. You might have exerted yourself more during the performance, but you worked out a lot harder during the practice. And so you've got to prepare yourself for these peak performance moments, whether you're an Olympic athlete or mom and dad. These are times that they need to, and part of the mental process is part of that equation.
I love it. You're like a mind coach. And your device feels like I'm being coached for success mentally. I cannot speak highly enough of it. And I saw you speak 3 times before I took the plunge and purchased one, because I made this pact to myself. I said, you're not going to go out, Steve, and continue to just buy every gadget that comes out. It needs to be vetted. And I vetted you, and it was one of the best decisions I have made, because I now appreciate what having a practice for my nervous system and how I think and feel and my self-dialogue. I can see what it's doing for me. I can feel it. I can take the thing off and I go, I feel different than 15 minutes ago. It's fascinating. I would love to ask you a lot more questions about it. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Sure.
At night, because you have the light that comes on, do you recommend putting the eye thing down when you're doing, like, let's say a PM session before sleep, or will the light keep you up?
80% of the people can do that without any problem, because, like, do you have blue eyes or brown eyes? I can't tell.
Blue eyes.
So blue-eyed people, we typically say put it up, mainly because blue-eyed people bring in more light. They're mostly Nordic people, so you're not used to getting so much light. Brown-eyed people don't bring in as much light. So it really depends. My wife is a blue-eyed person. She's blonde, blue-eyed, from that area, and she can't do it at night. She can do the audio, which is fine, and use the ear lights. But if she uses the other, it's like she slept all night. Yeah. And it's really about energy, because your eyes are closed and we're using 470 nanometer light, and it's only 8 LEDs. So your cell phone has over 1 million. So the light emission isn't that much, but just because it's triggering those chromophores, it tells you what time of day it is. And we've done study after study. Like when we did the study in Australia with coal miners, and these are people that never see the light of day. They have no circadian rhythm. It took 3 weeks, and they did use the lights right before bed, every one of them. And we got their sleep scores up to 70%, which is almost impossible, because they were all drinking. And we took 50 people, and we only accepted 32 into the study, because they had to agree to be alcohol free during the study. Because if you drink alcohol, you're not going to do any brain fitness. I mean, you can have, if you're out there and you can do it, just know that I've scanned people, like I've had doctors say, I don't think that neurocheck works. And we'd be in Vegas, right? And I'd say, you know what? We're going to be here for a while. Are you going to have a drink tonight? Oh yeah. Go have a drink and come back. Just one drink. And I showed them how all their numbers crashed, because they thought it was a random number generator. I said, I'm not doing anything different. I'm just putting it on. They go, what happened? I go, that went directly to your brain. Your brain needs ketones, right? It needs fat, but the brain will it thinks that sugar in the system is good. And that's the buzz because it's killing off brain cells. And somebody says, well, I have a lot of brain cells. Those are the ones that I'll drool with when I get older. But I can guarantee, I can guarantee you when you're on your deathbed, if somebody was to say, you know what, if you gave up that behavior, you'd have one more hour with your favorite grandchild or one more day with your favorite person, you would exchange that in a heartbeat. So the immediate gratification is what's running the world. We need to have long-term thinking. And, the whole thing is that find out what works for you. What we tell people, we don't tell them not to listen to it at night because it's a very small percentage. I say 20%, but it might only be 3% because we hardly ever hear of it unless they're listening to Dave Asprey and the biohackers, because there's a lot of misconception about blue light. We live in a blue light planet. Without blue light, we wouldn't have the moods that we have. We wouldn't be able to function. But at night, there are people, just like EMF, it's affecting all of us.
Yeah.
I think the blue light does affect us all, but it's the lights at our home are much more damaging than the LED lights that we have in the BrainTap. But it's all depends on who you are. And we've done studies. We find that it's actually more beneficial to use the lights. But if you're not sleeping, we don't want you to do that. We'd rather have you have a deep sleep cycle.
And you have buttons that make the LEDs brighter or dimmer. And so for me, I think what I'll do is I'll just put on the dimmest setting and I'll start there and see what that does. Okay, fine. One more question for you. Is there any supplements, molecules, agents of change, anything that will potentiate a microdose? I mean, anything that will potentiate...
right there in LA, I'll introduce you to them. It's called Mind Expander. This is a new one. I'm on their board. It's called Mind Expander. The company is right there in LA. I'll get you their names. They'll come over and see you. This is actually, it's a nano aerosol neurotropic. It's not it appears like it's one of those smoking things.
Yeah.
I can't do those at all. This is actually what you do. And they have they have drops too that they do, like the C60, the carbon. They own the patent for carbon-based. So you take it in, you go, I'm just going to do it for you so you can see it.
Yeah.
You just breathe in for 3 seconds. You'll see this green light come on. So you come out my nose. That's not smoke. That's water. This is bound with water. And because it's a carbon-based atom, this is ATP and glutathione. Nice. It just cleaned my brain. Now I'm going to get a brain boost. What we did when I found this company, in fact, they were at the event you were at because I invited them over there because I just met them and I was evaluating it. And what we did was anyone on our test that was below 20 on the scale, the one that says, are you between 0 and 100? Yeah. Anybody below 20, I had them take, we had a bunch of these there and I had them take, I said, would you be willing to, this is just water. It's not smoke or, the negative stuff that's out there. Cause I can't do smoke. My lungs just can't do it in smoke. I think it's because I was an athlete too. I just have a negative to that, but they have this also in a liquid. You can take it. This is just because you're taking it through the nose. It's the fastest way to get it in your brain.
Yeah. And it's called Mind Expander?
It's called Mind Expander. And I'll introduce you to them. You should have them they'll give you some samples and we'll get it to you and then you can evaluate it. But it basically glutathione, all this glutathione that's out there in the market, it's not getting past the blood-brain barrier. It's really good for the brain, but they found a way in their research to bind it with the carbon-based atom. We're mostly carbon. Yeah. So it basically... it's intelligently designed to go to the brain. And that's one of them. They also have the C60 molecule. And they also have one that has zinc in it and things for people who have maybe they have a cold or a flu.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Like an inhalable zinc. That's fantastic. And C60, I was on that for years as Buckmeister fullerene, these little carbon balls that they can give and take an electron, and they're really good antioxidant. And helped rats live 90% longer, or had to euthanize them. Actually, they were like, we can't kill these rats; they won't die.
Yeah. So what they did was they found out a lot of the C60 molecules being bound. They're just taking the C60 and they're taking oils and they're mixing them together. Yeah. And even though it's a good oil, it's not getting in because it needs to be bound to the carbon atom. So then it bypasses the blood-brain barrier. It gets right into the brain. And this is one that we tested. I mean, every person I put it on, by the end of that health conference we were at, the last one, I was like, Ugo, the guy's name's Ugo and David. I said, you guys got something here. I've never seen a supplement that instantaneously changes the brain. And then once you get the energy, because it's ATP, into the brain, now you can do the work of brain change, because neuroplasticity is really the energy at the cellular level in the brain. And we need nutrients. Nutrients is number one. You can't outthink a bad diet, right? So you have, and this is a nutrient that's hard to get in. And I've never heard of it before meeting them. And I met them through Dan Metcalf, which you might know. He was a Premier League soccer player, and he lives in LA too now. He coaches some high-performing athletes, and we do some things with him with the balance board. These are all things I need to introduce you to them, because you would like them and what they're doing. And I love them because they're helping for the elderly that are having brain problems. They need things that are easy, that they don't have to think about. And so Dan created this balance board for Bob Eubanks, who's, he used to be on the Dating Game. He was the MC for that. He was almost in a wheelchair. Now he's out golfing again and doing different things.
Really?
Yeah. So it's incredible. What we're finding out with the brain is there's so much that we don't know, that people, LA seems to be a place where a lot of these geniuses pop up because you got so many people there.
Yeah.
But balance has a lot to do with the brain.
Yeah.
People don't understand that.
Yeah, I would imagine. So, I don't know from a scientific perspective, but I can tell that a lot of physical traits and practices really translate to for me, because gymnastics is a ton of balance and a ton of exercise and all this stuff. But my brain, it feels amazing when I do anything related to that stuff. I will definitely, I will have to, take you up on this.
I'll connect you through a text group, and you guys can talk. They're right there with you. You're in LA, right?
I've been to Vegas since January, January. So
I'll be in Vegas in a couple of weeks, and they'll probably be there too. Because it's a Health 2.0 conference that we're speaking at there in Vegas. So
cool. Maybe I'll
let you know what's happening. But they might be over there. They might just send you some. It doesn't take a lot to learn how to use. It's very easy. And I love it because even my wife will take it, and she's always leery when I come back from a conference, because there's always, all these different things that happen.
Oh my God. I have so much stuff. It's unbelievable. And I love it. This is what I do, and I get excited like a kid, Dr. Porter, what a fantastic, podcast with you. I cannot appreciate you sharing your knowledge, coming on board. I know you're a very busy guy, and I think your product is revolutionary, and I give it my highest recommendation. 100%. I love it. I will, whatever you continue to do to make that product in the future, more advanced, if it needs to be, I'm on board. And, thank you for creating that thing. Really, how can people find you?
Well, they can go to drdrpatrickporter.com. They can, all the social media links are there. There's links back to BrainTap. If they liked what they heard here, they can see a lot of videos on my YouTube site, which is there. It's the same thing. That's the @ sign. But we have it online. Hopefully you can share that in your notes. And one thing is, we're on a mission to better 1 billion brains, and we need people like you. That's why I do this, because we're not going to change the planet doing this in our own bedroom, meditating in silence. We need to spread the word that you do have a good brain, and it can change at any age. It just needs the right activity. And so what I tell people is, you got to eat the right food, you got to move and breathe. Exercise is key. And then you've got to do some kind of brain fitness. And if you do those 3 things, you can have a healthy brain until you leave this planet.
Yeah. Neurological disease is one of the big 4? I think it is, right? Alzheimer's is one of the big 4.
Now it's worse than ever, because it seems like everything's attacking our brain or our heart. One of the two. You're reading about it all. Our heart has a brain of its own of 40,000 neutrino cells. So it's attacking those, basically the way we think. Yeah. And so we need to work on that.
Yeah. Well, I will include everything in the show notes at stephenmccain.com/BrainTap. That's brain, TAP. It'll be chocked full of stuff, and there's a discount code in there to get a BrainTap. And basically they get a headset, and then they subscribe to the app, and the app has all the, it's really amazing, easy to use. You can, and then there's a start your journey thing where it just kind of guides them and gets them going. Fantastic stuff, Dr. Porter. Thank you so much for coming on. And thank you everyone for listening to the Stephen McCain podcast. And check out the show notes, stephenmccain.com/BrainTap. And we will see you on the next episode of the Stephen McCain podcast. Take care, everyone. Stay healthy.